Over my dead body. Uganda's president just sent a message the West can't ignore. Uganda says no more free resources, and the global powers are furious. Raw materials ban? Uganda just flipped the script on Western exploitation. The West didn't expect this. Uganda just slammed the door on free extraction deals. Not again. Uganda fights back against decades of resource debt. Uganda just broke the cycle, and it's a warning to every colonial profiteer. Africa is rising. Uganda leads the charge against economic colonialism. The president's bold words shook boardrooms across Europe. No more free ride. The world heard it loud and clear. Uganda is done being exploited. One speech. One stand. A new Africa begins with Uganda's fearless message, breaking news. In a powerful and historic speech, Uganda's president has declared, "Over my dead body," vowing that Uganda will no longer export free raw materials to Western powers. This bold move has sent shockwaves through global industries that have long depended on Africa's resources for cheap profits. Uganda is reclaiming control over its gold, oil, cobalt, and rare minerals, signaling a dramatic shift in African policy. The era of free exploitation is over. As President Yoweri Museveni joins a growing wave of African leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, Assimi Goïta, and Doumbouya, the fight against neo-colonialism intensifies. Watch this video to understand how this game-changing declaration is disrupting international trade deals, sparking outrage among Western corporations, and inspiring nations across Africa to unite and resist economic exploitation. Don't miss this eye-opening exposé. This is the real African revolution, and Uganda just took the lead. On June 1, 2025, Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni delivered a fiery speech, reportedly declaring, "Over my dead body," in response to the continued export of Uganda's raw materials to Western powers without fair compensation. This bold statement underscores a growing movement among African leaders to challenge the historical exploitation of the continent's natural resources. Museveni's vow to halt the export of unprocessed gold, oil, cobalt, and rare minerals signals a significant shift in Uganda's economic policy and aligns with a broader African push to end neo-colonial practices. This report examines the context, economic implications, global reactions, and the role of this move in the fight against neo-colonialism, drawing on recent sentiment from posts on X while critically assessing the narrative. Historical context. Africa's resource exploitation. Africa has long been a source of valuable raw materials, including gold, oil, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, which are critical for global industries such as technology, energy, and manufacturing. Historically, colonial powers extracted these resources with minimal benefit to local populations, a pattern that continued post-independence through neo-colonial economic arrangements. Foreign corporations, often backed by Western governments, have secured favorable mining and trade deals, exporting raw materials at low costs while processing and value addition occur abroad, reaping massive profits. Recent posts on X highlight Museveni's long-standing advocacy for value addition, with statements dating back to 2023 urging Europe to stop buying Africa's raw materials without investing in local processing. These posts suggest a consistent policy focus on retaining economic benefits within Uganda, though their accuracy and context require verification. Museveni's latest speech builds on this narrative, framing the export of unprocessed materials as a continuation of colonial exploitation that impoverishes African nations. Museveni's declaration. Key points. Museveni's speech, as reported, is a direct challenge to the status quo. By vowing, "Over my dead body," he emphasizes an unwavering commitment to stopping the export of raw materials without local processing. Key points include, halt on raw material exports. Uganda will prioritize processing its gold, oil, cobalt, and rare minerals domestically to retain economic value. Economic self-reliance. The policy aims to build local industries, create jobs, and increase export revenues through value-added products. Rejection of neo-colonialism. Museveni positions this move as a stand against foreign exploitation, aligning with leaders like Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré, Mali's Assimi Goïta, and Guinea's Mamadi Doumbouya, who have similarly challenged Western dominance. While X posts describe this as a historic moment, the exact phrasing and full context of the speech remain unverified, as primary sources like official transcripts are not referenced. The intensity of Museveni's rhetoric suggests a calculated effort to rally domestic and continental support while sending a message to global markets. Economic implications for Uganda. Opportunities. Industrial growth. By investing in local processing facilities, Uganda could develop industries for refining gold, producing petroleum products, and manufacturing cobalt-based components, fostering economic diversification. Job creation. Domestic processing would create jobs in mining, manufacturing, and related sectors, addressing Uganda's high unemployment rates. Increased revenue, exporting value-added products, such as refined gold or processed cobalt, could significantly boost Uganda's GDP compared to raw material exports. Challenges infrastructure gaps. Uganda lacks the advanced processing facilities and technical expertise needed for large-scale value addition, requiring significant investment. Global pushback. Western industries reliant on cheap raw materials may resist through trade sanctions, reduced investment, or diplomatic pressure. Financial risks. Building processing plants demands substantial capital, potentially increasing debt or requiring partnerships that could compromise sovereignty. Posts on X emphasize Museveni's focus on agro-processing and manufacturing as critical to wealth creation, but they lack detail on how Uganda will overcome these challenges. Global industry impact. Museveni's policy could disrupt global supply chains for critical minerals. Cobalt, essential for batteries in electric vehicles and electronics, is heavily sourced from Africa. Uganda's push for local processing may increase prices. Reduced supply of raw cobalt and other minerals could drive up global prices, impacting industries in the US, Europe, and China. Shift trade dynamics. Western companies may need to invest in African processing facilities or seek alternative suppliers, potentially in less stable regions. Encourage regional competition. Other African nations may follow Uganda's lead, amplifying the continent's bargaining power. The lack of primary data on Uganda's production capacity limits the ability to quantify these impacts. However, the sentiment on X suggests global industries are rattled by the prospect of losing access to cheap resources. The broader African movement. Museveni's stance aligns with a growing wave of African leaders resisting neo-colonial economic structures. Leaders like Traoré, Goïta, and Doumbouya have taken steps to assert control over their country's resources, including nationalizing mines and renegotiating foreign contracts. This movement reflects Pan-African sentiment, a shared goal of economic sovereignty and equitable global trade. Youthful leadership. Younger leaders like Traoré and Goïta resonate with populations frustrated by decades of exploitation. Regional cooperation. Potential for African nations to collaborate on processing infrastructure, reducing reliance on Western markets. Ex-posts frame this as a continent-wide awakening, but the lack of coordination among leaders and varying national contexts may hinder unified action. Critical analysis. Opportunities and risks. While Museveni's declaration is bold, its success depends on execution. Uganda must navigate domestic political risks. Museveni's long tenure has faced criticism for authoritarianism, and this policy could be seen as a populist move to bolster support. Failure to deliver could erode trust. International relations. Alienating Western partners risks economic isolation, though partnerships with China or Russia could offset this. Sustainability. Ensuring that local communities benefit from processing industries is critical to avoid replicating exploitative structures domestically. The ex-post's celebratory tone may overstate the policy's immediate impact, as systemic change requires time and resources. Critical examination suggests Museveni's rhetoric, while powerful, must be backed by concrete investments and transparent governance to succeed. Why Museveni made this bold decision. President Yoweri Museveni's declaration to halt the export of Uganda's raw materials, reportedly punctuated by the phrase, "over my dead body," reflects a convergence of political, economic, and ideological motivations. Several factors likely drove this bold stance. Historical frustration with exploitation. Museveni, in power since 1986, has long criticized the colonial and neo-colonial structures that extract Africa's resources while leaving little economic benefit for local populations. Posts on X highlight his earlier statements, such as those from 2023, urging Europe to invest in African processing rather than importing raw materials. This suggests a consistent belief that raw material exports perpetuate poverty. Domestic political strategy. Facing criticism for his long tenure and accusations of authoritarianism, Museveni may see this policy as a way to bolster domestic support. By framing himself as a champion against foreign exploitation, he appeals to nationalist sentiments, particularly among younger Ugandans frustrated by economic stagnation, Pan-African momentum. Museveni's decision aligns with a growing wave of African leaders, such as Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré and Mali's Assimi Goïta, who advocate for resource sovereignty. This collective movement provides political cover and amplifies Uganda's stance, positioning Museveni as a leader in the fight against neo-colonialism. Economic necessity. Uganda's economy relies heavily on raw material exports, yet the country faces persistent trade deficits and limited industrial capacity. By prioritizing local processing, Museveni aims to capture greater economic value, addressing unemployment and boosting GDP. Ex posts emphasizes focus on agro-processing and manufacturing as wealth creation strategies. While Museveni's rhetoric is bold, the lack of an official transcript makes it difficult to verify the exact context. The decision likely balances genuine ideological commitment with pragmatic political calculations, though its success hinges on overcoming significant implementation challenges. The shocking numbers behind global trade imbalance. The global trade system has long disadvantaged African nations, with Uganda's raw material exports exemplifying the imbalance. Below are key statistics and insights, drawn from general knowledge and contextualized with sentiment, though specific figures for 2025 remain unverified due to limited primary data. Raw material dependency. Africa accounts for approximately 30% of global mineral reserves, including 60% of cobalt, 30% of gold, and significant oil deposits. Yet, African nations receive less than 10% of the final value of products made from these resources, as processing occurs abroad. Uganda's export profile. In 2022, Uganda's exports were valued at approximately $6 billion, with raw materials like gold, $1.2 billion, coffee, $800 million, and oil, emerging sector, dominating. Processed goods accounted for less than 15% of exports, highlighting the lack of value addition. Trade deficits. Uganda's trade deficit was around $2.5 billion in 2022, driven by imports of high-value manufactured goods versus low-value raw exports. This mirrors a broader African trend, where the continent's trade deficit with developed nations exceeds $100 billion annually. Profit disparities. For every ton of raw cobalt exported from Africa, valued at $20,000, Western companies can generate over $200,000 in value through battery production. Similarly, raw gold exports yield a fraction of the profits from refined jewelry or electronics components. Ex-posts describe this as looting of African resources, with some users citing a 2023 UN report estimating that Africa loses $88.6 billion annually through illicit financial flows tied to resource exports. While these figures resonate with the narrative, their accuracy for 2025 requires further validation. The imbalance underscores why Museveni seeks to retain value domestically, as raw exports perpetuate economic dependency. How Uganda plans to industrialize and retain its value. Museveni's vision to stop raw material export centers on industrializing Uganda to process gold, oil, cobalt, and rare minerals locally. The strategy, as inferred from ex-posts and general knowledge, includes building processing infrastructure. Uganda is investing in refineries and processing plants. For example, the Albertine Graben oil project, with production starting in 2025, includes plans for a domestic refinery to produce fuel and petrochemicals. Gold refining facilities are also under consideration to meet international standards. Policy reforms. The government is promoting policies to incentivize local processing, such as tax breaks for manufacturers and restrictions on raw material exports. A 2023 policy requiring value addition for mineral exports, referenced on X, may be expanded to enforce compliance. Skilled workforce development. Uganda plans to train engineers and technicians through partnerships with universities and foreign investors to build capacity for industrial processes. Vocational programs are being scaled up to support this shift. Regional collaboration. Museveni has advocated for East African Community (EAC) cooperation to develop shared infrastructure, reducing costs. For instance, a regional cobalt processing hub could serve Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. Attracting investment. While rejecting exploitative deals, Uganda is open to partnerships with countries like China, which has funded infrastructure projects like the Karuma hydropower plant. These partnerships aim to provide capital and technology without compromising sovereignty. Challenges include Uganda's limited infrastructure, high initial costs, estimated at $1 to $2 billion for a modern refinery, and dependence on foreign expertise. Ex-posts express optimism but lack specifics on funding or timelines, suggesting the plan is ambitious but nascent. The silent war over Africa's resources and the West's response. Museveni's declaration is part of a broader, often unspoken, struggle for control over Africa's resources, with significant implications for global powers. Africa's strategic importance. The continent's vast reserves of cobalt, lithium, and rare earths are critical for the global energy transition, particularly electric vehicle batteries and renewable technologies. Western nations, China and Russia, are competing to secure access, often through economic or diplomatic leverage. Western response. Museveni's policy threatens Western industries reliant on cheap African resources. Potential responses include economic pressure, reduced investment or trade sanctions to discourage similar policies elsewhere. Diplomatic pushback, criticism of Museveni's governance record to undermine his credibility, as seen in past Western critiques of his elections. Investment shifts, redirecting capital to more compliant African nations, though this risks instability in alternative suppliers like the DRC. China's role. China, a major buyer of African minerals, may support Uganda's industrialization to secure long-term partnerships. However, this could deepen Uganda's debt, as seen in other African nations under China's Belt and Road Initiative. African unity. Leaders like Traoré, Goïta, and Doumbouya are similarly asserting resource control, creating a potential bloc to counter Western influence. Ex-posts frame this as a silent war, with African nations leveraging their resources to demand equitable terms. The West's response remains speculative, as no official statements are cited in recent ex-posts. Historical patterns suggest a mix of resistance and adaptation, with companies like Glencore or Total potentially investing in local processing to maintain access, albeit reluctantly. Conclusion. President Museveni's decision to halt raw material exports is a bold move driven by historical grievances, political strategy, and economic ambition. The shocking trade imbalances, where Africa loses billions annually while Western industries profit, underscore the urgency of this shift. Uganda's industrialization plans, centered on processing gold, oil, and cobalt, aim to retain value but face significant hurdles in funding and infrastructure. Meanwhile, the policy intensifies a silent war over Africa's resources, with the West likely to respond with a mix of pressure and pragmatic concessions. As Uganda joins a growing African movement, the success of this revolution will depend on strategic execution and regional solidarity, potentially reshaping global trade dynamics. President Yoweri Museveni's declaration marks a pivotal moment in Uganda's economic policy and Africa's fight against neo-colonialism. By refusing to export raw materials without value addition, Uganda challenges a global system that has long profited from Africa's resources. While the move promises economic empowerment, it faces significant hurdles in infrastructure, financing, and global diplomacy. As part of a broader African movement, Museveni's stance could inspire change across the continent, but its success hinges on strategic planning and regional cooperation. The world watches as Uganda takes a stand, potentially reshaping the dynamics of global resource trade.